In July of 1993, Emily Harper and Scott Beckett said "I do" in a modest church ceremony on the outskirts of Bozeman, Montana. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was full of love. The Beckett name carried weight, old money, old timber, and the whispers had been relentless. What was the heir to Beckett Lumber doing with a girl from a single-parent home who worked part-time at a florist? But Scott never flinched. He loved Emily. He married her, and that night they vanished. Their absence was first chalked up to spontaneity. A honeymoon off the grid, perhaps. Maybe a cross-country road trip. Scott had always talked about Glacier Park, and Emily had once mentioned New Mexico. But when days turned into weeks and there were no calls, no postcards, no credit card activity, people began to worry. The newly gifted silver Range Rover, a wedding present from Scott's father, was gone too. Some thought they'd crashed somewhere remote. Others believed they'd run away. The police had no leads. The trail went cold. 14 years passed. The world changed. Flip phones turned into smartphones, and Emily's mother, Sharon Harper, learned how to live with absence. She didn't stop hoping, but she learned how to breathe through the silence. On the good days, she told herself that maybe Emily had chosen something new, something freeing. On the bad ones, she believed her daughter was gone. In the summer of 2007, a group of geology students from the University of Oregon were doing a long-term environmental impact study using satellite imaging across remote wilderness zones in Idaho. One student, looking through historical images of alpine lake wilderness, noticed something odd in the 1993 file. A long pale shape, barely visible, resting beneath the surface of a backcountry lake. It didn't belong there. The group enhanced the image, ran overlays, and flagged the GPS coordinates. They didn't know it yet, but they were staring at the missing piece of a 14-year-old mystery. They alerted the local authorities. A dive team was assembled, sonar scans were deployed, and soon enough, a submerged vehicle was located near the eastern bend of Phantom Lake. It took hours to pull it out. What emerged wasn't just a Range Rover. It was a time capsule from a life that had ended mid-sentence. The exterior was corroded and coated in silt, the windows long gone. The inside was mostly stripped by time and water, but the glove box yielded one clue, a gold Rolex engraved with initials that matched Scott's father. The local department in Boise contacted both families. When Sharon picked up the phone at the Eugene Farmers Market, she nearly dropped the small carton of tomatoes she was weighing. It had been years since a call like that had come. She almost didn't believe the man on the other end. He introduced himself, Detective Ray Duvall, Boise PD. His voice was calm, but precise. They'd recovered a vehicle connected to the 1993 Beckett Harper case. He needed her to come to the site in Idaho for identification. Sharon didn't ask how far the drive would be. She just said yes. By the time she arrived at the lake, the media hadn't caught wind yet, but the Becketts had. Malcolm Beckett was already there, leaning on his cane like it meant something more than support. His wife Margaret stood beside him, sunglasses straight-backed, as if politeness could turn back time. Their younger son Jordan hung back, silent. None of them said anything when Sharon approached. The detective met her at the makeshift perimeter, walked her to the flatbed where the Range Rover sat dripping. She hadn't seen that car in over a decade, but there was no mistaking it. That was the vehicle her daughter had climbed into after hugging her goodbye on that July afternoon. Malcolm stepped forward as the evidence bag was held up. "That's mine," he said, pointing to the Rolex inside. "It's one of a pair. I gave the other to Scott the day he graduated." There were no bones, no clothing, no sign of a struggle, just the vehicle, the watch, and a vacuum where two lives had once been. The detective noted that the water at Phantom Lake was deep, isolated, the kind of place someone could disappear into without a trace. Maybe not by accident. Sharon didn't cry. She didn't ask what was next. But standing there, surrounded by faces she barely trusted, she felt something stir beneath the grief. A question that had never fully died. What really happened to Emily and Scott that night? And why had no one ever gone looking here before? Sharon didn't sleep that night. Back at the motel in Boise, she stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things she hadn't said to her daughter. She had so many questions, and all she'd been given was a waterlogged SUV and a watch. The hole inside her felt just as wide as it did in 1993. Early the next morning, Detective Duval called. He asked her to meet him at the station. Said there was someone she needed to talk to. When Sharon arrived, she was surprised to see Jordan Beckett waiting with a cardboard box on his lap. He stood up awkwardly, mumbled a greeting, and gestured toward the box. "I found some of Scott's things," he said. "Stuff from his old room. I figured you might want to look through it, see if any of it belonged to Emily." Sharon nodded. She didn't trust the Becketts, not really, but Jordan had always seemed different. He'd been younger back then, barely out of high school. Quiet, thoughtful. He wasn't the one who'd accused her daughter of being a gold digger or thrown around phrases like marrying up. She thanked him and took the box back to her car. Inside were books, cassette tapes, a flannel shirt she vaguely remembered Scott wearing, and a few personal items. At the bottom was a smaller box, wrapped in black velvet. Sharon hesitated before opening it. Inside was a delicate set of black lace lingerie, still folded perfectly, tags intact. A tiny envelope was tucked inside the lid. The card was handwritten, signed simply, "From Cole." The handwriting was bold, masculine, unfamiliar. Sharon stared at the name. Cole. She didn't know any Cole. Emily had never mentioned one. There'd never been a Cole in her friend circle, not in high school, not in college, not at the flower shop where she'd worked. And the date on the price tag said July 1993, just weeks before the wedding. Back at the station, Sharon showed the set to Duval. He frowned, took a few photos, and asked if she'd mind him holding onto it for evidence. She agreed. He jotted the name down in his notebook. "I'll run it through local records," he said. "See if we can find anyone connected to that name. Cole isn't super common, but it's not rare either." She watched as he carefully bagged the item, treating it like it might explode. He didn't say much more, but Sharon could tell. Something about it unsettled him too. Later that afternoon, she decided to return a few more of Scott's old things: shirts, a tennis racket, a high school yearbook, to the Beckett estate just outside of Boise. She drove up to the gated driveway, thinking she'd just leave the box on the porch and be done with it. But the gate opened before she could buzz in. Malcolm Beckett stepped out from the garage. "What are you doing here?" His tone carried all the warmth of a closed door. Sharon held up the box. "Returning Scott's things." "Leave it," he snapped. "We'll have someone deal with it. I'd prefer to hand it to someone directly. I don't care what you prefer." He turned to walk away, but Sharon didn't move. Something about him had always rubbed her wrong, but today he seemed even more clipped than usual. There was a tension in his words she couldn't place, like he was more than just angry, like he was afraid. Eventually, Jordan came outside, saw the box, and stepped in. "Dad, it's fine. I'll take it." Malcolm gave him a long, hard look, then disappeared back into the house. Sharon handed over the box, and Jordan gave her a small nod. "I was going through more of Scott's things," he said, almost in a whisper. "There's something you should see." She followed him inside. The house hadn't changed much in 14 years, still felt like a showroom more than a home. In Scott's old room, Margaret was already sorting through drawers. She looked up, her expression unreadable. Jordan pulled a dusty shoebox from under the bed and handed it to Sharon. Inside, buried under a stack of cassette cases and receipts, was another small envelope. Same handwriting, same signature, Cole. Margaret's face tightened. "We don't know who he is either," she said quietly. "But whatever this is, it doesn't feel right." Jordan nodded. And if Scott had something to hide, it wasn't like him to do it carelessly, which means maybe he wasn't hiding it. Maybe someone else was. Sharon felt the room tilt slightly. A strange name, an expensive gift, and now multiple notes. Someone had been trying to get close to Emily, or already had. And now Emily was gone. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right. Sharon couldn't shake the feeling that whoever Cole was, he hadn't just sent a gift. He'd left a trail. And someone had tried very hard to bury it. Sharon left the Beckett house feeling more unsettled than ever. There was something off about the way Malcolm had responded. Dismissive, sure, but there was something underneath it. Not just contempt. He looked shaken. For a man who'd built half the city in his name, that was unusual. She tried to put it out of her mind, but later that evening, as she pulled into her driveway, her headlights swept across a car she didn't recognize parked a few houses down. A black Lexus. The same kind Malcolm drove. It wasn't his. She would have recognized the plates. but it was close enough to raise the hairs on her neck. Sharon parked, waited, and watched. A few minutes later, a man stepped out from the passenger side. Younger, early 30s maybe, wearing a white shirt and jeans, chain around his neck with shiny letters that caught the light. C and L, maybe an S? He moved quickly, glancing around like he didn't want to be seen. She stayed in her car until he was gone, then walked a block in the direction he came from. Nothing. The Lexus pulled away a few minutes later. She noted the time, wrote down what she could recall about the plates. Her gut told her it wasn't random. The next day, she called Detective Duval and told him what she'd seen. He said he'd look into it, but Sharon could tell he thought she might be reaching. It wasn't enough. Not yet. So she started doing what she hadn't done in years, asking questions. She called an old friend from her days working admin at the Bozeman courthouse. Asked if she could discreetly check any recent filings under the name Cole or anything tied to the Beckett family. Her friend hesitated, but said she'd try. That afternoon, Sharon drove back to the Beckett estate. Not to talk, just to see. She didn't even make it past the gate before something caught her attention. Malcolm's driver, an older man named Roy she remembered from the wedding, was pulling out in Scott's old car. Not a replica, the actual one. She was certain. She'd spent hours helping Emily decorate that dashboard with college bumper stickers. It was unmistakable. Roy didn't notice her. He turned north toward the highway. Sharon followed. He drove toward the industrial district near the Boise River, past warehouses and vacant lots, until he pulled into the back entrance of Beckett Lumber's main office. Sharon parked across the street and waited. 5 minutes later, Malcolm came out. He looked around, spoke to Roy, then handed him a set of keys. They exchanged a few words, and Roy left again. This time in a different car. The black Lexus. It didn't add up. If Scott's old car had supposedly been stolen or disappeared with them, why was it still around? And why was it being moved now, after all these years? She waited until Malcolm went back inside, then crossed the street and walked past the loading docks. No one stopped her. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for, until she saw it. A storage unit labeled CLS-7. Same letters she'd seen on that key tag Malcolm had dropped. It was locked with a heavy-duty padlock. That night, she went home and wrote everything down. Every detail. The name Cole, the car, the necklace, the storage unit. She didn't know what it meant yet, but it was something. 2 days later, her friend from the courthouse called back. There's a Cole Bishop who had a sealed juvenile record in Gallatin County back in the 80s, she said quietly. It's hard to get anything concrete, but his name came up once in a report tied to Scott Beckett's circle. Sharon thanked her and hung up. Then she searched online. Cole Bishop was a name that hadn't surfaced in Bozeman in a long time. But there were traces. A parking ticket in Pocatello, a payroll record from a local construction company tied to Beckett Lumber, and one photo, blurry, in a yearbook from 1989. Same face, same chain around the neck. He wasn't just a name on a card. He was real, and he was still close. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about what Emily had told her months before the wedding, when they'd been folding programs and tying bows. Scott's family's complicated, she'd said. His dad's got all these rules about who he's supposed to be, what kind of wife he's supposed to have. Sharon hadn't taken it seriously then. She just assumed it was rich family nonsense. Now she wondered if Emily had been more scared than she'd let on. And now, this man, Cole, was circling back into their lives. Maybe he never really left. Sharon didn't call the police right away. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But she knew enough about people like Malcolm Beckett to understand how fast they could twist a story, turn facts into fiction, and fiction into character assassination. She'd seen it before. A missing daughter turned into a runaway, a grieving mother painted as a woman clinging to a fantasy. No, if she was going to be heard, she needed more than suspicion. So she waited. She paid attention. 3 days after spotting Roy driving Scott's old car, Sharon got her moment. It was a Thursday afternoon, and she was picking up coffee at a diner near the edge of town when she saw the black Lexus again, this time pulling out of a side alley behind the Beckett office complex. Roy was in the driver's seat. Beside him sat the man with the chain, Cole. She didn't hesitate. She got in her car and followed at a distance, letting another vehicle slip between them. She didn't know what she was doing. She'd never followed anyone in her life, but something inside her said this mattered. The Lexus moved through the southern part of Boise, toward the edge of the city, where buildings gave way to long stretches of highway and farmland. After 20 minutes, they turned down a narrow county road she didn't recognize. It wound past abandoned barns, empty fields, and eventually faded into a gravel path that seemed to lead nowhere. She pulled off and waited, far enough back to not be seen. The Lexus continued down the gravel until it stopped beside a rusted gate. Cole got out. Roy followed. They talked for a while, both of them facing a long stretch of open land that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Sharon couldn't hear them, but when Cole knelt and pointed to a spot near a cluster of rocks, something in her stomach dropped. She didn't need to hear the words. She knew what this was. After a few minutes, the two men returned to the car and drove off. Sharon waited until they were completely gone, then crept forward. The gravel shifted under her tires as she eased toward the spot Cole had pointed to. She got out and walked. There was no marker, no cross, just a patch of earth that looked slightly disturbed, like it had settled unevenly over time. It could have been nothing, but in her bones, she felt it. Emily was here. Back in her car, her hands trembled as she dialed Duval. She spoke quickly, clearly, like she didn't want to give him space to interrupt. She told him about Cole, about the Lexus, about the storage unit, the necklace, the gift box, the years of silence, and what she'd just witnessed out there in the field. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then he asked for coordinates. She gave them. By nightfall, the site was marked off with yellow tape. Crime scene techs were flown in. Ground-penetrating radar was brought out. Sharon stayed just long enough to watch them begin, then left before the media showed up. This wasn't about headlines. It was about truth. The next morning, Duval called. They'd found remains, shallow grave, decomposed beyond recognition, but the fabric matched what Emily had been wearing the day she vanished. Dental records would confirm. He sounded tired. More than that, he sounded older. "There's more," he said. "We brought Cole in. He talked." And what he said pulled the ground out from under her. Cole claimed he'd been hired by Malcolm Beckett the spring before the wedding. His job was simple: pursue Emily, make Scott jealous, make him doubt her. Beckett didn't want a florist's daughter in the family. He wanted an heiress, or at least someone whose name carried weight. Emily didn't fit that mold, but Scott didn't take the bait. If anything, the attention made him dig in deeper. He proposed even sooner. They planned the wedding on their own terms. That, according to Cole, was when things escalated. Malcolm didn't just want the marriage ended. He wanted it erased. Cole said he didn't know the full plan until the night of the honeymoon. He thought they were just going to scare Emily, maybe rough her up, maybe make it look like she ran. But when they arrived at the cabin Scott had rented near McCall, things got out of hand. Roy was there too. That part was new. And what happened inside that cabin was something Cole refused to repeat in detail. He only said one thing that stuck in Sharon's mind long after the call ended. She screamed for her mother. That night, Sharon sat alone at her kitchen table. The truth was out, but closure felt like a myth. She had answers, but no peace. News of the arrest broke by noon. Local reporters crowded outside the Boise Police Department, buzzing about the reopening of the Harper Beckett disappearance, a case most people hadn't thought about in over a decade. Sharon watched it unfold on TV from her living room, the sound turned low. The screen flashed images of Malcolm Beckett being escorted into the station, flanked by officers, his jaw locked tight, his eyes stone cold. Cole had been taken in earlier that morning. According to Detective Duval, he waived his right to a lawyer for the first interview. Maybe guilt caught up to him. Maybe he finally realized Malcolm wouldn't protect him anymore. Whatever the reason, he talked. He said it all started as a favor. Roy brought him in, said Malcolm needed someone to handle a delicate family situation. It sounded vague at first. Just a job, easy money. But the closer it got to the wedding, the darker the instructions became. Cole admitted he was the one who delivered the lingerie gift, hoping it would make Emily question herself. Or better yet, that Scott would find it and accuse her of cheating. Malcolm thought a little suspicion would be enough to stop the ceremony. But it didn't work. The couple went through with the wedding anyway. The night of the honeymoon, Cole and Roy showed up at the rented cabin near McCall, let themselves in using a key Malcolm had arranged through a friend who managed the property. They thought Scott would be out. He was supposed to be picking up food. The plan was to intimidate Emily, scare her, pressure her to leave. But she fought back. Cole said she screamed once. Then Roy snapped. Everything after that unraveled fast. Scott came back early. He saw blood, heard the tail end of what happened, tried to call 911, but Roy hit him with something heavy. Cole said it was never supposed to be like that. They weren't killers, just hired help. But now there were two bodies and no way to spin it. That's when Malcolm stepped in. He drove up that night, loaded both bodies into a company truck, took the SUV, and drove it all the way to Phantom Lake himself. He dropped it into the deepest part, thinking the current would carry it off eventually. The bodies were buried miles apart. Emily out in that gravel field, Scott cremated days later under a false name and hidden in a Beckett family vault. Sharon couldn't understand how someone could do that to their own child. She met Eleanor Beckett later that evening, outside the police station. The woman looked like she hadn't slept. Her makeup was gone, her jewelry left at home. Just a mother who had no more illusions about the man she'd been married to for 40 years. "I didn't know," Eleanor said, her voice low. "I swear to you, I didn't know." Sharon didn't respond at first. There wasn't much to say, but she nodded, not out of forgiveness, just recognition. Pain sees pain. Detective Duvall came out shortly after, holding a folder. Inside were the results of the dental comparison. The remains found in the field were officially confirmed to be Emily's. He also told them that the urn marked under the name C.L. Sawyer inside the Beckett vault was positively identified through DNA as Scott. They were both accounted for, he said quietly. After 14 years. Sharon left with that folder in her hand. She didn't read the full report. She didn't need the details. She already knew the story by heart. At home, she called Jordan Beckett. He didn't answer at first, but when he called back an hour later, his voice cracked on the second word. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I should have seen it. I should have said something years ago." Sharon told him it wasn't his fault. Not really. No one saw it because no one wanted to. He asked if he could be there when they buried Emily properly. Said Scott deserved the same. Sharon agreed. They chose a quiet plot near the foothills where the wind never stopped moving and the trees didn't feel like watchers. Sharon picked out 2 stones, side by side. Nothing fancy, just names, dates, and one shared line beneath both. They chose love. He tried to erase it. He failed. The funeral was quiet. Just a few dozen people, mostly old friends and former neighbors. A handful of Emily's co-workers from the flower shop came, some with their teenage kids in tow. A few of Scott's former classmates showed up, standing near the back, unsure of what to say. Nobody brought cameras. Nobody made speeches. It wasn't that kind of service. Jordan read a short passage from a letter Scott had written a week before the wedding. Emily had kept it folded in her nightstand, and Sharon had found it while packing up her room all those years ago. She'd never been able to bring herself to open it. Until now. In the letter, Scott wrote about how love wasn't a straight line, how it didn't always make sense to other people. He said Emily taught him that love didn't have to be loud to be strong, that sometimes it was quiet defiance, a choice made again and again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Afterward, people drifted away slowly, hugging, nodding, saying things like, "She deserved better," and "He was a good man." Sharon stayed until the last of the dirt was placed, and then longer still. Jordan stayed too. He didn't try to fill the silence. He just stood nearby, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground, like he finally understood what had really been taken from all of them. In the weeks that followed, the press moved on. The headlines faded. The Beckett Lumber Board of Directors voted to remove Malcolm's name from all company property. Eleanor resigned from every social board she'd once led. Roy took a plea deal in exchange for full testimony, and Cole accepted a reduced sentence in return for his cooperation. Malcolm refused to speak in court, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life without parole. Sharon didn't attend the trial. She didn't need to watch him try to explain the unexplainable. Instead, she focused on something she hadn't done in a long time: living. She reopened Emily's flower shop under a new name, Wild Grace. The place had been sitting empty for years, and the landlord gave her a generous discount once he heard why she wanted it. Sharon didn't try to modernize it. She kept the shelves simple, the inventory small. Locals came in, more out of loyalty than need, and stayed because the place felt honest. Jordan stopped by once a week to help with deliveries. Sometimes they'd eat lunch on the back steps, not talking much. Other times, he'd ask about Emily. Not the big things, just what her laugh sounded like, what kind of music she liked in the car, whether she really hated mushrooms as much as she claimed. Sharon answered each question like it was a prayer. One afternoon, a teenage girl came in wearing a faded Beckett high sweatshirt. She picked out a small bouquet and placed a crumpled $10 bill on the counter. As Sharon wrapped it in brown paper, the girl hesitated. "You're Emily Harper's mom, right?" she asked. Sharon nodded. "My mom used to talk about her," the girl said. "Said she was kind. Said she never acted like she was better than anyone, even when people were mean to her." Sharon smiled. "Kindness doesn't mean weakness," she said. "Your mom was right." The girl left, and Sharon stood there for a long time, looking out the window at nothing in particular. Later that night, she sat with a journal she'd kept tucked away in a drawer for years. The pages were mostly blank, except for one sentence Emily had written her on a Post-it note back in high school. "You don't have to be loud to matter." She read it again, then closed the journal and turned off the light. Some stories don't get happy endings, but they get truth. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. Thank you so much for being here. This story wasn't just about loss or justice. It was about how love, no matter how quietly it exists, can leave a legacy stronger than fear, wealth, or silence. It's a reminder that the truth, no matter how long it's buried, finds its way back. And when it does, it gives the living a chance to heal, to honor what was lost, and to start again. If this story moved you or gave you something to think about, we'd be grateful if you showed your support. Just hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future stories that matter. Thanks again for your time, your presence, and your heart.